The stars looked different through the window of the human ship. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the training room, sweat dripping down his face. He had just finished his morning workout. It was part of his daily routine, something he never skipped. Even today, when he was supposed to meet an alien Empress for the first time, he made sure to exercise. Jake wiped his face with a towel and headed to the shower. In 2 hours, he would stand before Empress Valendra of the Zalarian Empire. This was humanity's first real contact with another intelligent species. Everything had to go perfectly. The diplomatic team had practiced their greetings for weeks. They knew exactly what to say and how to act. After showering, Jake put on his dress uniform. The dark blue fabric fit him well, with shiny medals on his chest. He looked at himself in the mirror. At 34 years old, he never thought he would be the one to meet aliens. But here he was, about to make history. Lieutenant Amy Chen knocked on his door. She was his second in command, a smart woman who spoke 5 languages. She would help translate if the computers failed. Dr. Henry Kim walked behind her. He was the team's scientist, always carrying his scanning equipment and taking notes on everything he saw. The 3 of them boarded the shuttle that would take them to the planet below. Zalara Prime looked beautiful from space. The entire planet seemed to glow with a soft blue light. As they descended through the atmosphere, they could see massive crystal structures rising from the surface. These were the cities of the Zalarians. When the shuttle landed, Jake felt the difference immediately. The air was perfectly clean, almost too clean. There was no smell at all. The temperature was exactly 18 degrees, not too hot or cold. Everything felt artificial, controlled. 2 tall figures waited for them at the landing platform. The Zalarians were incredibly tall, at least 7 feet. Their skin had a strange blue shimmer, like looking at oil on water. Their eyes were large and silver, with no visible pupils. They moved slowly, gracefully, as if walking took no effort at all. They wore long robes that seemed to float around them. One of the Zalarians stepped forward. He spoke in perfect English, though his mouth barely moved. Later, Jake would learn that Zalarians could send thoughts directly into minds. This one introduced himself as High Chancellor Morvex. He would guide them to the Empress. They walked through the palace, and Jake had never seen anything like it. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that glowed from within. The floors were so smooth, they looked like mirrors. Everything was perfect, clean, and organized. There were no stairs because the Zalarians simply floated up to higher levels using some kind of gravity technology. The humans had to use special platforms that lifted them up. Dr. Kim kept scanning, everything with his equipment, his eyes wide with excitement. Amy walked close to Jake, occasionally whispering reminders about the proper greeting protocol. Finally, they reached the throne room. The doors opened without anyone touching them. Inside, the room was enormous. Hundreds of Zalarians stood in perfect rows, all watching the humans enter. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat Empress Valendra. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The Empress was stunning in a way that went beyond simple beauty. She was taller than the other Zalarians, her skin shimmering with more colors. Her silver eyes seemed to glow with an inner light. She wore a crown made of some transparent material that looked like frozen starlight. Her robes were white and gold, moving around her even though there was no wind. The humans walked forward slowly. Jake could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching their every move. The Zalarians were completely silent. The only sound was the soft footsteps of the humans on the crystal floor. When they reached the proper distance, Jake stopped and bowed as he had practiced. Amy and Dr. Kim did the same. Jake straightened up and began his prepared speech. He spoke about humanity's desire for peace and friendship. He talked about the amazing journey that brought them here. He said all the right words in all the right ways. Empress Valendra listened without moving. Her face showed no emotion. When Jake finished speaking, she rose from her throne. She floated down to their level, her robes trailing behind her like water. She stopped a few feet away from Jake. Her voice was like music when she spoke. She welcomed the humans to her empire. She spoke of the importance of this meeting. Then she did something that surprised everyone. She extended her hand toward Jake. It was a human gesture, a handshake. Someone must have taught her about this custom. Jake smiled and reached out to take her hand. The moment their skin touched, everything changed. Valendra's silver eyes suddenly went wide. Her pupils, which Jake had not even known she had, dilated until they were huge. Her perfect composure cracked. Her hand trembled in his. The Empress took a sharp breath. Her skin, which had been a steady blue shimmer, began to pulse with different colors. Pink, purple, and deep red rippled across her face and neck. She stood frozen, her hand still in Jake's, her whole body suddenly stiff. Jake noticed something was wrong. He gently released her hand, worried that he had somehow hurt her. The moment he let go, Valendra stepped back quickly. She brought her hand to her chest, breathing fast. The colors on her skin continued to swirl and change. The other Zalarians in the room stirred. Whispers spread through the crowd, though Jake could not understand their language. High Chancellor Morvex moved closer to the Empress, concern clear on his face. He spoke to her in their language, his voice urgent. Valendra shook her head slightly. She straightened up, clearly trying to regain her composure. But Jake could see that something was very wrong. The Empress kept looking at him, then looking away, then looking back. Her breathing was still unsteady. The perfect control she had shown before was gone. She spoke again, but her voice was different now. It was less steady, almost breathless. She said that the ceremony would continue tomorrow. She needed to consult with her advisors about the details of the agreement. It was clearly an excuse. She turned and floated away quickly, disappearing through a door behind the throne. The throne room erupted in confused conversation. Zalarians spoke to each other in urgent tones. High Chancellor Morvex stared at the humans with suspicion in his silver eyes. He gestured for guards to escort the humans out. As they walked back through the crystal corridors, Jake felt confused and worried. Amy and Dr. Kim kept exchanging glances. None of them spoke until they were back on their shuttle. Once the doors closed and they were alone, Dr. Kim pulled out his scanner. He had been recording everything. He played back the moment when Jake and the Empress touched hands. On the screen, they could see the dramatic change in her body temperature, her heart rate, her skin color. Something about that simple handshake had affected the Empress strongly, but none of them understood what or why. Jake sat in his seat staring at his hand. What had just happened? Had he somehow poisoned her? Was the mission already a failure? Meanwhile, deep in the private chambers of the palace, Empress Valendra stood alone. She looked at her reflection in a polished crystal surface. Her skin was still changing colors, something that had not happened since she was very young. Her hearts were racing. Her mind, usually so clear and organized, was a confused mess of sensations and emotions. She could still smell him. That strange, sharp scent that had filled her senses the moment she got close to the human captain. It was nothing like anything she had ever encountered. It made her feel hot, restless, and strangely hungry for something she could not name. She tried to use her telepathic abilities to calm herself, but they would not work properly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. She felt the warmth of his hand. She remembered that smell, so strong and overwhelming. For the first time in her 847 years of life, Empress Valendra had absolutely no control over her own body, and she did not understand why. 3 days had passed since the strange incident in the throne room. Jake and his team waited in their assigned quarters in the palace. The rooms were beautiful but uncomfortable. Everything was too perfect, too cold, too quiet. Jake missed the mess and noise of human spaces. The negotiations had resumed, but something was very wrong. The Empress sat at the far end of a long crystal table as far from Jake as possible. She would not look directly at him. When she had to speak to him, her voice was tight and controlled. Her skin kept shifting colors, something the other Zalarians clearly found unusual. High Chancellor Morvex watched everything with cold, suspicious eyes. He sat next to the Empress, often leaning over to whisper to her. Jake caught the Chancellor staring at him several times with what looked like anger or fear. During the meetings, strange things kept happening. The Empress would agree to terms that shocked her own advisors. She would lose her train of thought mid-sentence. Once she knocked over a crystal cup, something that seemed impossible for someone with her grace. The other Zalarians exchanged worried looks. Dr. Kim spent his free time analyzing the data from his scanners. He called Jake and Amy to his room on the third evening. His face was serious as he showed them charts and numbers on his computer screen. The data showed something incredible. When Jake got close to the Empress, her body temperature rose. Her heart rate increased. Her brain activity spiked in areas related to emotions and physical responses. It looked exactly like what happened to humans when they were strongly attracted to someone. But there was more. Dr. Kim had been scanning the air around them. He found traces of chemicals in Jake's sweat, tiny amounts that humans would never notice. These chemicals were similar to pheromones, the natural scents that animals use to attract mates. Apparently, human pheromones were much stronger than anyone had realized. Amy leaned forward, studying the data. She asked if this meant the Empress was attracted to Jake because of his smell. Dr. Kim nodded slowly. But it was worse than simple attraction. The Zalarians had evolved in completely sterile environments. Their bodies had never developed defenses against strong chemical signals like human pheromones. To them, it must be overwhelming, almost like a drug. Jake felt sick. He was essentially poisoning the Empress just by being near her. No wonder the Chancellor looked at him with such suspicion. They had to tell someone. But who would believe them? And what could they do about it? The next morning, Jake asked for a private meeting with High Chancellor Morvex. The request was denied. He tried to send a message to the Empress. That was denied too. The Zalarians were clearly limiting contact between Jake and their leader. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. A Zalarian woman appeared at their quarters. She introduced herself as Lady Sarantha, the Empress's personal physician. She was shorter than most Zalarians, with kind eyes and a calm manner. She asked to speak with Dr. Kim privately. Jake and Amy waited anxiously while the two doctors talked behind closed doors. When they emerged an hour later, both looked worried. Lady Sarantha explained that she had been studying the Empress's condition. She had noticed the same things Dr. Kim had discovered. The human pheromones were affecting the Empress's biology in dangerous ways. But there was more. Lady Sarantha said that prolonged exposure was creating a dependency. The Empress's body was starting to crave the presence of these chemicals. When Jake was not around, the Empress felt anxious and restless. When he was near, she could barely think straight. It was a terrible situation with no easy solution. Jake asked what they could do. Could he leave? Would that help? Lady Sarantha shook her head. Leaving suddenly might make things worse. The Empress was already showing signs of withdrawal. Her advisors had noticed her distraction, her mistakes in judgment. If it continued, they might remove her from power. Amy suggested they tell the Empress the truth. Let her know what was happening and why. Maybe if she understood, she could fight against it. Lady Sarantha looked doubtful but agreed it was worth trying. She said she would arrange a meeting. That evening, Jake was escorted to a private garden deep in the palace. It was the first outdoor space he had seen on this world. Strange plants with crystal leaves grew in perfect patterns. A small stream of some glowing liquid flowed through smooth channels. Everything was beautiful and artificial. Empress Valendra stood beside the stream, her back to him. She did not turn when he approached. Jake stopped several feet away, trying to give her space. He did not know what to say. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost sad. She said she knew why he was there. Lady Sarantha had explained everything. She understood now what was happening to her. But understanding did not make it easier. Jake apologized. He had not meant to cause harm. He did not even know humans could affect aliens this way. If she wanted him to leave, he would go immediately. Earth could send different diplomats, people who might not have this effect. Valendra finally turned to face him. Her eyes were sad but also curious. She asked him what it was like to be human, to live with these powerful emotions and physical sensations all the time. Did humans constantly feel overwhelmed by their own biology? Jake thought about it. He explained that humans did feel things strongly. Love, anger, fear, attraction. But they learned to live with it. They made choices despite their feelings, not because of them. It was difficult sometimes, but it also made life interesting. Valendra listened carefully. She admitted that Zalarian life was very controlled. They rarely felt strong emotions. Everything was calm, peaceful, and rational. For centuries, she had thought this was the superior way to live, but now she was not so sure. The chaos she was feeling was terrible, but it was also strangely alive. They talked for a long time. Jake told her about Earth, about human history, about the struggles and triumphs of his people. Valendra spoke about the Zalarian Empire, about the thousands of years of peace and progress. Despite the awkward situation, they found themselves genuinely interested in each other's perspectives. As they talked, Jake noticed something. The Empress seemed calmer. Her skin had settled into a steady, soft blue color. She was able to maintain eye contact without looking away. Maybe talking was helping, but then disaster struck. As Jake was leaving, he stumbled slightly on the unfamiliar ground. Valendra reached out instinctively to steady him. Their hands touched again. The effect was immediate and even stronger than before. Valendra gasped. Her whole body went rigid. The colors on her skin exploded into a wild pattern of reds, purples, and golds. Her silver eyes went completely black as her pupils dilated. She swayed on her feet. Jake grabbed her shoulders to keep her from falling. That made everything worse. He could suddenly feel something strange in his mind. Emotions that were not his own. Confusion, desire, fear, fascination, all mixing together in an overwhelming flood. The Empress's telepathic abilities were leaking out, uncontrolled. For a moment, they stood frozen, connected by touch and the accidental telepathic link. Jake felt what the Empress was feeling. The overwhelming attraction, yes, but also something deeper. Genuine curiosity about humanity, respect for his honesty, fear of losing control, loneliness from centuries of leadership. Then Valendra pulled away sharply. The telepathic connection broke. She stood there, breathing hard, her whole body trembling. Guards came running, alerted by some alarm Jake had not heard. They surrounded him, weapons drawn. High Chancellor Morvex appeared moments later. His face showed fury. He shouted orders in the Zalarian language. The guards grabbed Jake roughly, pulling him away from the Empress. He tried to explain it was an accident, but no one was listening. As Jake was dragged away, he looked back at Valendra. She stood alone in the garden, her arms wrapped around herself, looking more vulnerable than any ruler should ever look. Their eyes met for just a moment. In that moment, Jake understood the truth. This was not just about biology anymore. Something real was developing between them. Something that went beyond pheromones and chemical reactions. Back in his quarters, with guards posted outside his door, Jake sat in the dark. Dr. Kim and Amy tried to contact him but were turned away. He was essentially under arrest. The mission was falling apart. And worst of all, he had hurt someone who did not deserve it. In her private chambers, Empress Valendra faced a different kind of prison. Lady Sarantha ran urgent medical scans while advisors argued about what to do. High Chancellor Morvex stood in the corner, watching everything with grim satisfaction. He had been right to be suspicious of the humans. Now everyone could see it, but Valendra was not listening to any of them. She was thinking about the moment when their minds had touched. She had felt Jake's emotions too. His genuine concern for her. His frustration at the situation. His determination to do the right thing. He was not trying to manipulate her. He was just as much a victim of biology as she was. The Empress made a decision. She dismissed everyone except Lady Sarantha and High Chancellor Morvex. She told them she was calling an emergency council session. The Chancellor nodded, thinking she was finally going to expel the humans. But Valendra had something else in mind. She was going to tell the truth to her entire government. And then she was going to fight for the right to continue negotiations, even if it meant admitting her own vulnerability. Because despite everything, despite the chaos and the loss of control, Valendra had learned something important in the past few days. Sometimes the most valuable things in life were the ones that challenged you, that pushed you out of your comfort zone, that made you feel truly alive. And humanity, messy and chaotic as they were, might be exactly what the Zalarian Empire needed. The council chamber was massive and intimidating. Hundreds of Zalarian nobles and officials sat in circular rows that rose up like an ancient amphitheater. In the center stood a single platform where the accused would speak. Jake had been brought here under guard, still not knowing exactly what was happening. Amy and Dr. Kim sat in a special section reserved for witnesses. They looked worried. Other humans from the diplomatic ship had been allowed to attend, all of them confused and frightened about what this meant for Earth's first contact. Empress Valendra entered last, walking instead of floating. It was a sign of humility that shocked the assembled Zalarians. She wore simple robes without her crown. She took a seat among the council members, not on her throne. Jake suddenly understood. She was not here as Empress. She was here as someone whose judgment was being questioned. High Chancellor Morvex stood at another platform opposite Jake. His voice echoed through the chamber as he began to speak. He talked about the ancient Clarity Protocol, a law that allowed the council to remove a ruler if that ruler's mind was compromised. He claimed that Empress Valendra had been affected by human biological weapons, making her unable to lead properly. Jake wanted to shout that it was not a weapon, that they had not known, but guards held him silent. Morvex continued, presenting evidence, medical scans showing the Empress's altered brain chemistry, records of her mistakes in negotiations, testimony from advisors who had seen her unusual behavior. The evidence was damning. Then Morvex played the recording from the garden. The hologram showed Jake and Valendra touching, the Empress's dramatic reaction, the telepathic connection. The council members gasped and whispered. Some looked angry. Others looked frightened. The idea that humans could have this effect was clearly terrifying to them. When Morvex finished, the chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to Valendra. She stood slowly and walked to the center platform. For a long moment, she just looked around at her people, at the government she had led for 300 years. Then she began to speak. Her voice was clear and strong. She did not deny anything. Yes, human pheromones affected her biology in powerful ways. Yes, she had felt attraction and confusion. Yes, she had made mistakes. But being affected by something did not mean being controlled by it. She asked the council a question. When they listened to beautiful music, did it not affect their emotions? When they saw art, did it not change their thoughts? When they felt loyalty to the Empire, was that not a chemical reaction in their brains? All sentient beings were influenced by their environment and biology. The question was not whether you felt things, but whether you could think clearly despite those feelings. Valendra argued that every decision she had made regarding humanity was sound. She had agreed to trade terms that benefited both species. She had established safety protocols. She had learned about a new culture. The fact that she found their captain personally challenging did not invalidate any of that. Some council members seemed swayed by her words. Others still looked doubtful. Then it was time for Jake to speak. He was brought to the center platform, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien eyes on him. An electronic translator was placed around his neck so everyone could understand him. Jake spoke honestly. He explained human evolution, how his species had developed in a harsh world where pheromones helped with survival. Humans lived with these chemical signals every day. They felt attraction, desire, fear, anger, all driven partly by biology. But they still made choices. They still had free will. Biology influenced humans, but it did not control them. He admitted that humans had not known about this effect on Zellarians. It was an accident, a terrible mistake, but it was not a weapon. Humans wanted peace and friendship, not to harm anyone. If the council wanted all humans to leave, he would understand. But he hoped they would see that this challenge was an opportunity to learn and grow. Dr. Kim was called next. He presented his scientific findings with Lady Sarantha beside him. Together, the human and Zellarian doctors had been working on a solution. They had developed a small device that could filter out the pheromone signals before they reached the Zellarian brain. It would allow Zellarians to interact with humans without being overwhelmed. Lady Sarantha demonstrated the device. It was a tiny piece of technology worn behind the ear. She put one on and asked Jake to approach her. He walked closer until he stood right next to her. The device's reading showed that the pheromones were being blocked. Lady Sarantha remained perfectly calm and controlled. But then something unexpected happened. A voice came from the back of the chamber. It was a young Zellarian noble who asked a challenging question. If this technology worked so well, why did the Empress not use it during her meeting with the human captain? Was she afraid it would not work? Or did she not want it to work? The chamber erupted in discussion. It was a fair question. Valendra could have worn the device during their conversation in the garden. The fact that she did not suggested that maybe she wanted to feel those overwhelming sensations. Maybe her judgment truly was compromised. Valendra stood again. The chamber fell silent. She addressed the question directly. She admitted that Lady Sarantha had offered her the device before that meeting. She had chosen not to wear it. Not because she wanted to be overwhelmed, but because she wanted to understand what she was feeling. She wanted to face the challenge directly, honestly, without hiding behind technology. She continued speaking and her voice grew passionate. She said that the Zalarian Empire had become too comfortable, too controlled. For thousands of years, they had eliminated every challenge, every discomfort, every strong emotion. They had created a perfect society, but had they also created a weak one that could not handle anything unexpected? Humanity represented something the Empire had not faced in centuries. Real challenge, real growth, real life. Yes, humans were chaotic and emotional and sometimes overwhelming, but they were also vibrant and adaptive and incredibly resilient. Perhaps the Zalarian Empire could learn from them. Valendra made a bold move. She asked Lady Sarantha to display her current medical readings on the large screens around the chamber. Everyone could see her elevated heart rate, her changing skin temperature, her active brain chemistry. Jake was standing less than 20 feet away and the effect was obvious. Then Valendra put on one of the filter devices. The readings immediately stabilized. Her heart slowed, her temperature normalized, her brain activity calmed. The device clearly worked, but then she did something that shocked everyone. She removed the device. The medical readings spiked again. Valendra stood there in front of her entire government, letting them see her vulnerability. She was experiencing powerful biological reactions. Everyone could see it on the screens. But she remained standing. She continued speaking clearly. She maintained her composure through sheer will and determination. This, she said, was what she had learned from humanity. Not how to eliminate challenges, but how to face them. Not how to avoid feeling, but how to think clearly while feeling. The technology was available for those who needed it. But she wanted to prove that Zalarians could handle this challenge without completely hiding from it. The council chamber was completely silent. Every Zalarian was staring at their Empress with a mixture of shock, concern, and something that might have been respect. She was demonstrating incredible mental strength, staying focused and rational while her biology was in chaos. High Chancellor Morvex tried to argue that this proved his point. The Empress was forcing herself to endure something harmful. But other council members disagreed. They pointed out that soldiers trained to endure pain, scientists worked in uncomfortable conditions, leaders made difficult decisions while under stress. Valendra was demonstrating leadership, not weakness. A senior council member stood and proposed a compromise. The Clarity Protocol would not be invoked. The Empress would remain in power. However, there would be strict protocols for human interaction. The filter devices would be mandatory for all official meetings. Regular medical monitoring would be required for any Zalarian who worked closely with humans. And there would be a trial period of 1 year to assess if coexistence was possible. The council voted. It was close, but the majority agreed with the compromise. Valendra would keep her throne. The humans would be allowed to stay. But everyone would be watching carefully to see if this experiment in cross-species relations could work. As the session ended, Valendra put the filter device back on. Her medical readings stabilized once more. She nodded to Jake from across the chamber. He nodded back, relief washing over him. They had survived this crisis. But he knew this was just the beginning. The real work of building trust between their species was still ahead. Later that evening, Jake stood on a balcony outside his quarters, looking at the alien stars. Amy joined him, bringing 2 cups of something the Zalarians claimed was similar to tea. They stood in silence for a while. Amy finally spoke. She said that today was probably the strangest day in human history. They had almost destroyed first contact because of body odor. Jake laughed, a tired sound. When they told this story back on Earth, nobody would believe it. But beneath the humor, both of them understood something important had happened. The Empress had chosen honesty over hiding. She had shown her vulnerability and turned it into strength. That took courage. It also showed that maybe, just maybe, these 2 very different species could find a way to understand each other. In her private chambers, Valendra sat alone. She still wore the filter device, but she was thinking about taking it off. Not because she enjoyed the overwhelming sensations, but because she was starting to believe what she had told the council. Growth came from facing challenges, not avoiding them. She thought about Captain Morrison. With the filter on, she could think about him clearly. She recognized that part of her attraction was biological, driven by pheromones her body had no defense against, but part of it was genuine appreciation for his character, his honesty, his willingness to accept blame even when he had done nothing wrong. his respect for her despite the situation. The coming months would be difficult. The council would watch her every move. High Chancellor Morvex would remain suspicious. Every mistake would be questioned. But Valendra had made her choice. She believed in the potential of human-Zalarian cooperation, and she was willing to fight for it, even if it meant fighting against her own biology. Outside, in the perfect Crystal City, a new era was beginning. Humans and Zalarians would learn to live together, to work together, and maybe even to understand each other. It would not be easy. But then again, nothing worth doing ever was. 6 months had passed since the council vote. The human embassy on Zalara Prime was now a permanent structure, a blend of Earth architecture and Zalarian crystal design. Jake stood on its roof, watching the sunrise over the alien city. The view never got old. Life had changed dramatically for everyone. More humans had arrived, including families of the diplomats. Children played in specially designed areas where gravity was adjusted for their comfort. Human laughter and noise filled spaces that had been silent for centuries. The Zalarians found it strange at first, but many had grown to enjoy the vitality. The filter devices had become standard equipment. Every Zalarian who worked with humans wore one. At first, some saw them as a sign of weakness, but gradually they became accepted as simply practical tools like glasses or hearing aids. The crisis had been managed. Jake's relationship with Empress Valendra had evolved into something neither of them had expected. They met regularly to discuss trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and diplomatic matters. With her filter device, Valendra could interact with him normally. Their conversations were intelligent, thoughtful, and often surprisingly fun. They had discovered shared interests. Both loved strategy games. Valendra taught Jake the ancient Zalarian game of crystal chess, where pieces moved in 4 dimensions. Jake taught her poker, and her telepathic abilities made her terrifying at bluffing. They argued about philosophy, compared their world's histories, and found themselves genuinely enjoying each other's company. Amy had become close friends with several young Zalarian scholars. She was learning their telepathic language, a form of communication that happened through shared thoughts rather than words. It turned out that some humans did have latent telepathic abilities. Amy was one of them. She could now sense emotions from nearby Zalarians, though she could not yet send thoughts clearly. Dr. Kim and Lady Sarantha had become an inseparable team. Their joint research station was studying both human and Zalarian biology. They had made fascinating discoveries. Small amounts of human pheromones, carefully controlled, could help Zalarians who suffered from emotional suppression. It was being developed as a treatment for certain mental health conditions. Meanwhile, humans were benefiting from Zalarian technology, medical devices that could heal injuries in hours, energy sources that produced no pollution, transportation systems that made cars and planes obsolete. Earth was entering a new age of prosperity thanks to the Alliance, but not everyone was happy about the changes. A group of Zalarian conservatives, led by a former advisor to High Chancellor Morvex, believed the Empire was being corrupted by human influence. They called themselves the Purity Movement. They held secret meetings and spoke of returning to the old ways before humans arrived. Jake did not know about the Purity Movement. Neither did most people. The group was small and operated in secret, but they were planning something dangerous. They believed that if they could prove humans were truly harmful, the Empress would have no choice but to expel them all. Their plan was set in motion on the day of the Grand Unity celebration, an event marking 6 months of successful cooperation. Hundreds of humans and Zalarians would gather in the palace's great hall. Speeches would be made, food would be shared. It was supposed to be a triumph of peace. The Purity Movement had a different plan. They had obtained samples of human sweat from the embassy's gym. Using advanced chemistry, they had concentrated the pheromones to an extreme level. They planned to release this compound through the ventilation system during the celebration. Every Zalarian in the hall would be overwhelmed, unable to think or function. It would prove that humans were too dangerous to keep around. The celebration began beautifully. The Great Hall had been decorated with both human and Zalarian art. Long tables held food from both worlds. Humans wore formal clothes while Zalarians wore their finest robes. Everyone was excited, optimistic about the future. Empress Valendra gave the opening speech. She spoke about the unexpected journey that had brought their species together. She acknowledged the difficulties they had faced and praised both humans and Zalarians for their patience and understanding. Jake stood nearby wearing his dress uniform, proud of what they had all accomplished. Then, midway through the celebration, it happened. The ventilation system began pumping the concentrated pheromone compound into the hall. At first, nobody noticed. Then, one by one, the Zolarians began to react. Their skin colors went wild. Their movements became uncoordinated. Some stood frozen, overwhelmed by sensations. Others stumbled around, confused. The filter devices that everyone wore began failing under the extreme concentration. Warning lights flashed on hundreds of devices at once. Panic spread through the crowd. Humans rushed to help their Zolarian friends, not understanding what was happening. Guards tried to maintain order, but were affected themselves. The celebration turned into chaos in minutes. Jake ran to Valendra. The Empress was near the center of the hall, where the pheromone concentration was strongest. Her filter device had completely failed. She stood rigid, her whole body shaking, her eyes unfocused. She was experiencing the full force of the attack with no protection at all. He grabbed her shoulders, trying to get her attention. He shouted her name. For a moment, she just stared at him blankly. Then something incredible happened. Her silver eyes focused. She took a deep breath. Despite the overwhelming biological assault on her system, despite having no working filter, despite being at ground zero of the attack, Valendra began to think clearly. She gripped Jake's arms, using him as an anchor to reality. Through gritted teeth, she asked what was happening. Jake explained quickly. Some kind of gas or chemical in the air. It was affecting all the Zolarians. They needed to evacuate the hall and shut down the ventilation system. Valendra nodded. Her voice was strained but clear. She began giving orders. First to Jake, then to the human security personnel who were not affected. They needed to get everyone out. They needed to find the source of the contamination. They needed to do it now. Working together, humans and the few Zolarians who could still function began evacuating the hall. It was difficult. Many Zolarians could barely walk. Their biology was completely overwhelmed. But slowly, steadily, they moved everyone to fresh air outside the palace. Valendra stayed until the very end, directing the evacuation even though she was clearly suffering. Her skin flashed through colors so rapidly it looked like a light show. Her hands trembled, but her voice never wavered. She remained in control through pure willpower. Once everyone was safe, human engineers and Zolarian technicians worked together to locate the source. They found the modified ventilation system and shut it down. They discovered the chemical compound and traced it back to its makers. The Purity Movement's plan was exposed. The conspirators were caught within hours. They confessed, believing they had done the right thing. They had tried to prove humans were dangerous. But their plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of showing human danger, they had demonstrated something else entirely. The Zolarians who had been affected began to recover. As the pheromones cleared from their systems, they found themselves able to think again. But many of them reported something surprising. During the attack, they had not completely lost control. They had been able to make choices. Some had helped others evacuate despite their own discomfort. Some had followed orders despite being overwhelmed. Biology had influenced them, but it had not controlled them. The next day, the council held an emergency meeting. The Purity Movement members were brought forward to answer for their crime. They had endangered hundreds of lives. They had tried to sabotage the Alliance. They had created a weapon from human biology. But as the council debated punishment, something unexpected happened. Many Zolarians spoke up in defense of the human alliance. They talked about what they had learned during the attack. They had faced their worst fear, being overwhelmed by human pheromones, and they had survived it. More than survived, they had functioned. One young Zolarian scientist stood and gave a passionate speech. She said that before humans arrived, the Empire had been stagnant. They had achieved perfection and had nowhere left to grow. But humans had challenged them, pushed them, forced them to adapt. The attack had proven that Zolarians were stronger than they thought. They could handle challenges they once would have run from. Others agreed. They spoke of human music, which moved them emotionally in ways Zolarian art never had. They talked about human sports, which had inspired young Zolarians to test their physical limits. They mentioned human literature, full of messy emotions and moral complexity that made them think differently. High Chancellor Morvex, who had been the biggest skeptic of the human alliance, stood to speak. Everyone expected him to call for the humans to leave. Instead, he surprised them all. He admitted he had been wrong. He had feared human influence would weaken the Empire, but he now saw that challenge created strength. The humans had brought chaos, yes, but they had also brought life. The conspirators were sentenced to community service, working to repair the damage they had caused. The council voted unanimously to continue and expand the human alliance. More humans would be welcomed. More cultural exchange would happen. The trial period was over. The partnership was permanent. That evening, Jake found Valendra in her private garden. She was sitting by the glowing stream, no filter device in sight. He approached carefully, concerned she might still be recovering from the attack. She smiled when she saw him. She explained that she had decided to stop wearing the filter during her private time. She had learned that she could handle the pheromone effects. They still affected her, yes, but she could think through them. Like yesterday when she had directed the evacuation despite being at the epicenter of the attack, Jake sat beside her. He said she had been incredible. Her strength during the crisis had convinced everyone that the Alliance could work. She had proven that Zalarians could adapt to anything. Valendra looked at the alien stars reflected in the water. She admitted something she had never said out loud. She was grateful for the pheromone effect, as difficult as it had been. It had forced her to grow, to change, to become a better leader. It had also brought the humans into her life, and that had enriched her world in ways she never expected. They sat together in comfortable silence, human and alien, two people from impossibly different worlds who had somehow become friends. The galaxy was vast and full of mysteries, but in that moment on that alien world under those strange stars, everything felt right. 1 year after first contact, the Zalarian Empire was almost unrecognizable. Humans now lived on dozens of Zalarian worlds. Zalarians visited Earth in growing numbers. The two species had become true partners, learning from each other in ways neither had imagined possible. The changes were everywhere. In the crystal cities of Zalara Prime, human-style parks had been built where Zalarians could experience nature without perfect control. Young Zalarians gathered there to play human sports like basketball and soccer. The sight of tall blue aliens running and sweating would have been shocking a year ago. Now it was normal. In the palace, human music played during certain hours. Zalarians had discovered jazz, rock, and classical music. They found that the emotional power of human music helped them access feelings they had suppressed for generations. There was even a Zalarian band that played human instruments, though their version of guitar solos involved telepathic harmonies that no human could match. The Joint Research Academy had opened 3 months ago. Dr. Kim and Lady Sarantha served as co-directors. Students from both species learned together, studying biology, culture, technology, and philosophy. The academy had become the symbol of what cooperation could achieve. Amy Chen had made an incredible discovery. Working with Zalarian telepaths, she had learned to fully communicate through thought. She could now send and receive telepathic messages. Other humans were learning too. It turned out that telepathy was not unique to Zalarians. Humans had the potential. They just needed training to unlock it. Jake had become Earth's permanent ambassador to the Zalarian Empire. He loved the work, though it was challenging. Every day brought new problems to solve, new misunderstandings to clear up, new opportunities to explore. But through it all, he had Valendra as a partner and friend. Their relationship had deepened over the months. They met almost daily, sometimes for official business, sometimes just to talk. Valendra had stopped wearing her filter device around Jake entirely. She had learned to manage the pheromone effects through meditation and mental discipline. She said it was like learning to think clearly while listening to loud music. Difficult but possible. They were walking through the palace gardens on the anniversary of their first meeting. It was the same garden where they had accidentally touched, and the telepathic connection had formed. They often came here to remember how far they had come. Valendra admitted that she could barely remember what life was like before humans arrived. The Empire had been peaceful and orderly, yes, but also stagnant. Nothing ever changed. Nothing ever challenged her. She had been a good Empress, but not a growing one. Jake said that Earth had changed too. Having access to Zalarian technology had solved many of humanity's problems. Clean energy had ended pollution. Advanced medicine had eliminated most diseases. Faster-than-light travel had opened the galaxy to exploration. But more than that, knowing they were not alone in the universe had given humanity a new perspective. Old conflicts seemed petty when you realized how vast space was and how much there was to learn. They sat by the glowing stream. Valendra looked at her reflection in the water. She said she had been thinking about something. The pheromone effect that had caused so much trouble in the beginning had turned out to be a gift. It had forced her to confront her limitations, to grow beyond them. It had also brought Jake into her life, and through him all of humanity. She admitted that she still felt the attraction. Even after a year, even with all her training and discipline, Jake's presence affected her. But now she understood it better. Part of it was biological, yes. The pheromones triggered responses in her brain that she could not completely control. But part of it was genuine. She valued Jake as a person, respected his judgment, enjoyed his company. The biology had brought them together, but friendship kept them together. Jake felt the same way. When they first met, he had only seen an alien Empress, beautiful and intimidating. Now he saw Valendra, a person who was wise and strong, but also curious and sometimes vulnerable. He cared about her in a way that went beyond diplomacy. They talked about the future. More humans were coming to Zalarian space. More Zalarians were visiting Earth. Eventually, there might be mixed communities, cities where both species lived together permanently. There would be challenges. Biology was only one of many differences between them. But they had proven they could work through problems together. High Chancellor Morvex appeared on the garden path, moving with his usual grace. He had requested to speak with both of them. Jake and Valendra exchanged glances. The Chancellor had become a supporter of the alliance, but he was still formal and serious about everything. Morvex bowed slightly to the Empress and nodded to Jake. He said he had come to admit something he should have said months ago. He had been wrong about humanity. He had seen them as a threat, as chaos that would destroy Zalarian order. But he now understood that order without growth was stagnation. Humanity had brought the challenge the Empire needed. More than that, Morvex admitted he had been wrong about Valendra. He had tried to remove her from power, believing she was compromised, but she had proven herself over and over. She had shown that wisdom meant adapting, not avoiding challenges. She was a better Empress now than she had been before humans arrived. The Empire was stronger because of her courage. Valendra thanked him graciously. She said his support meant a great deal. The Chancellor had been her loyal advisor for 2 centuries. His initial suspicion had been based on genuine concern for the Empire, not personal ambition. That kind of dedication was rare and valuable. Morvex said one more thing before leaving. He had been studying human history and culture. He found their stories fascinating, especially their tales of overcoming impossible odds. Humanity had faced extinction many times on Earth. Disease, war, natural disasters. But they always survived, always adapted. That resilience was their greatest strength. And now, thanks to the Alliance, the Zalarian Empire could learn that strength too. After the Chancellor left, Jake and Valendra sat in companionable silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that worked on both human and Zalarian eyes. 2 species that should never have been compatible were building something beautiful together. A group of young Zalarians ran past on the garden path, laughing and pushing each other playfully. They wore exercise clothes, heading to one of the new fitness centers. A year ago, Zalarians did not run unless absolutely necessary. They certainly did not laugh loudly in public. But humanity had taught them that joy could be expressed physically, that playing was not childish but healthy. Valendra watched them with a smile. She said she had received reports from colony worlds. Similar changes were happening across the Empire. Zalarians were experimenting with new things. Some were learning to cook, creating food for pleasure rather than just nutrition. Others were taking up art forms that expressed emotion rather than perfect technique. The Empire was becoming more alive. Jake mentioned that Earth was changing too. Humans were learning telepathy, which was creating new forms of communication and understanding. Human artists were creating works that combined sight and telepathic emotion. Human scientists were using Zalarian techniques to solve problems that had seemed impossible. Both species were becoming something new, something better than they had been alone. They talked about plans for a joint colony, a new world where humans and Zalarians would build a city together from the beginning. It would have areas suited to each species but also shared spaces where they could mix freely. It would be the first truly integrated community, a symbol of what was possible when different beings worked together. Valendra asked Jake if he ever regretted being the first human to meet aliens. His life could have been simpler. He could have stayed on Earth, had a normal career, avoided all this complexity. Jake laughed. Regret this? Never. Yes, it had been difficult. The pheromone crisis, the political battles, the constant pressure to succeed. But it had also been the most meaningful thing he had ever done. He was helping to build a future where humanity was not alone in the universe. Valendra understood. She had her own doubts sometimes. Leading the Empire through such dramatic change was exhausting. But when she saw young Zalarians discovering emotions they never knew they could feel, or watched human children learning telepathy, or witnessed the joint research teams making breakthrough discoveries, she knew it was worth it. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they made a pact. No matter what challenges came, they would face them together. The alliance between humans and Zalarians was bigger than any individual, but it had started with two people choosing trust over fear. That choice had changed everything. The formal anniversary ceremony was held the next day. Thousands of humans and Zalarians gathered in the great plaza outside the palace. The same hall where the attack had happened was now used for joint celebrations. The contaminated ventilation system had been replaced. The space held only good memories now. Empress Valendra gave a speech that was broadcast across the Empire and to Earth. She spoke about the unexpected journey that had brought their species together. She talked about the challenges they had faced and overcome. She acknowledged that difficulties still lay ahead, but she expressed confidence that humans and Zalarians would meet them together. Then she said something that made everyone pause. She announced the creation of the Academy of Integrated Studies, where both species could learn about biology, culture, and coexistence. Dr. Kim and Lady Sarantha had been co-directors of the Research Academy. Now they would expand their work. The new academy would teach the next generation of leaders how to bridge the gap between species. The crowd erupted in cheers, both human shouts and the Zalarian form of telepathic applause that felt like warm waves in the mind. Jake stood near the stage, watching Valendra command the attention of thousands. She was magnificent, truly worthy of leading an empire, and he was proud to call her his friend. After the ceremony, there was a celebration that lasted long into the night. Humans and Zalarians shared food, music, and stories. Amy demonstrated her telepathic abilities, sending messages to a group of Zalarian friends. Dr. Kim and Lady Sarantha announced their next research project, studying how mixed human-Zalarian communities could thrive. Even High Chancellor Morvex was seen smiling, something his staff claimed they had never witnessed before. Late in the evening, Jake found himself alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The crystal towers glowed with soft light. In the distance, he could see the human embassy, its different architecture standing out among the Zalarian buildings. Both styles, different but complementary, building a shared future. Valendra joined him, moving silently as only Zalarians could. They stood together looking at the transformed city. She said she had been thinking about their first meeting, how terrified she had been when she lost control, how certain she was that humans would be her downfall, how wrong she had been about everything. Jake reminded her that he had been terrified too. Meeting aliens for the first time, trying not to mess up humanity's chances, accidentally creating a diplomatic crisis because of sweat. Looking back, it seemed almost funny. Valendra agreed. The crisis that had almost destroyed everything had actually been the beginning of something wonderful. If she had not lost control, if the pheromones had not affected her, maybe the two species would have remained distant and formal. The accident had forced them to be honest with each other, to show vulnerability, to build real trust. She admitted that she rarely wore the filter device anymore. Not just around Jake, but in general. She had learned to function with the pheromone effects. They were still there, still influencing her biology, but she had adapted. Her body had actually changed over the months, developing partial resistance, evolution in real time. Other Zalarians were experiencing the same thing. The more time they spent around humans, the less overwhelming the effects became. It was still there, but manageable. Zalarian biology was proving more adaptable than anyone had believed. Given time and exposure, they might not need the filters at all. Jake marveled at that. Evolution usually took thousands of years, but intelligence could speed things up. The Zalarians had chosen to adapt rather than hide. They had faced their fear and overcome it. That took courage. They talked about what might happen next. Other alien species existed in the galaxy. The Zalarian Empire had known about them for centuries but had little contact. Now, with human help, maybe it was time to reach out. To build a real galactic community. If humans and Zalarians could overcome their differences, maybe any species could. Valendra liked that idea. She said she would propose it to the Council. Earth and the Zalarian Empire, working together, could reach out to other species. They could share what they had learned about cooperation and understanding. They could help build a galaxy where differences were celebrated rather than feared. As the night grew late, the celebration finally began to wind down. Humans and Zalarians said their goodbyes, promising to meet again soon. Friendships had formed that would last a lifetime. Bonds had been created that would shape the future. Jake walked back to the embassy, tired but content. He thought about everything that had happened in the past year. The fear, the confusion, the diplomatic crises, the moments of connection. It had all been worth it. Humanity was no longer alone. They had found friends among the stars. In her chambers, Valendra prepared for sleep. She looked at her reflection one last time. Her skin was steady blue now, calm and controlled, but she could still feel the faint effect of human pheromones lingering in the air from the celebration. It was a gentle reminder of how much she had grown. She thought about Jake and smiled. The human captain who had accidentally triggered the greatest crisis and the greatest opportunity of her reign. The man who had become her friend, her partner in building a new future. She was grateful for that first handshake, as chaotic as it had been. It had changed everything. The universe was vast and full of mysteries. Humans and Zalarians had barely begun to explore it, but they would do it together, learning from each other, growing together, building something neither species could have achieved alone. The accidental meeting of an Empress and a captain had become the foundation of a new age. And somewhere in the night, among the crystal towers and human buildings, among the silent telepaths and loud humans, among the perfect order and beautiful chaos, a new civilization was being born. One that combined the best of both species. One that proved that differences could be strengths. One that showed the galaxy what was possible when beings chose understanding over fear. The story of how humanity joined the galactic community would be told for generations. It would be a tale of unexpected attraction, diplomatic crises, biological challenges, and ultimate triumph. But at its heart, it would be a simple story. A story about two people from different worlds who learned to trust each other, and in doing so, change the fate of two civilizations.